Hello everyone. Normally we would have released a new episode of CDI Talks this week. This didn't happen, and this technical reason is the renewed Russian aggression against Ukraine. Make no mistake, Russia first invaded Ukraine back in 2014, 8 years ago, when it annexed Crimea and started a war in the Donbass. Then, for 8 long years, Russia tried to subjugate this European nation through political warfare, through malign influence operations, through agents of influence among Ukrainian politicians. Putin utterly failed. Ukraine stood its ground, and Ukrainians are standing their ground now, as Moscow has opted for a full-blown invasion. In the week that has passed, I gave multiple interviews to the international media explaining the reasons behind the invasion of Ukraine. My colleagues from the Austrian online journal Eurozine produced a podcast with me. I'll give a link to this podcast in the description of this video. I hope it will serve as a temporary replacement for an episode of CDI Talks that wasn't released. But here I would still like to say a few words. For 8 years, my colleagues and I were called warmongers, new cold warriors, propagandists, just because we called Russia's war what it really was, Russia's war against Ukraine. Our opponents insisted there was no Russian war, and the hostilities in eastern Ukraine were just a case of civil war, meaning that Ukrainians were fighting against Ukrainians. Nothing could be further from the truth, and the entire world, with the exception of a few rogue nations, now sees the outright lies about this so-called civil war in Ukraine. It was never a civil war. It was, right from the very beginning, a war that Russia started. But this is not simply a war against Ukraine. No, Russia is waging a war against Europe, against democracy, against freedom, human dignity, against all European values. It's a war against Europe because the main reason why Putin is waging it is that Ukraine renounced the retrograde, corrupt and ultimately degenerate political project of the Kremlin and made a sovereign decision to become part of the democratic West. Putin says that the aim of their so-called special operation in Ukraine, that is a criminal war against Ukraine, is demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. A few words about denazification. Do you know how Putin and his clique define the term Nazi? For them, a Nazi is every and each Ukrainian who believes that the Ukrainian nation is separate from the Russian nation, that Ukraine is independent from Russia, and should not belong to the Russian sphere of influence if it doesn't want to. This is how Nazism is defined by Moscow, as an idea that Ukraine has a right to exist. If you agree that Ukraine has this right, you're a Nazi. This is how academically perverse the Kremlin is. When Putin, his foreign minister Lavrov, and other Russian war criminals say they want to denazify Ukraine, this means that they want to destroy the Ukrainian state. They want to destroy the Ukrainian nation, to rape Ukrainian national consciousness, to erase Ukrainian identity. Putin and his clique say they want to protect Russian speakers and ethnic Russians from the Ukrainian army from the alleged genocide. This genocide is Russia's big lie. A significant part of the Ukrainian army is speaking Russian. Ukraine has a president whose mother tongue is Russian. Ukraine has no problems with Russian speakers or ethnic Russians. After all, it's a multi-ethnic state. But it does have a problem with Russian bombs, tanks, and guns that kill Ukrainian-speaking and Russian-speaking citizens of Ukraine alike. Ukraine stands its ground, as should do everyone in Europe and the West. It is vital to assist Ukraine in every imaginable sphere. Military assistance, medical help, humanitarian relief, just to name a few areas. This is not simply help to Ukraine. This is help to Europe, that is experiencing a brutal Russian invasion, a war waged by criminals who have no moral boundaries. They will only stop where we stop them. Defend Ukraine, defend Europe. Slava Ukraini!